The first time you become the one who rescues everyone, it rarely feels like a role. It feels like love. It feels like being the only person in the room who notices the pain before anyone says a word. It feels like instinct. Someone is falling apart, and something in you moves before you even think. You answer the message. You calm the panic. You explain the misunderstanding. You carry the mood of the room on your back and call it care. And for a while, people praise you for it. They call you strong. They call you kind. They call you the one who always understands. They lean on you in moments when they cannot hold themselves together. They cry in your presence and somehow leave lighter, while you remain behind with a strange heaviness in your chest that you cannot quite name. But there is a cost to being the one who always reaches first. At some point, love stops feeling mutual and starts feeling like emergency response. You are no longer meeting a person. You are meeting their crisis. Their confusion, their emptiness, their silence, their collapse, their need. And because you can feel it so deeply, because you can sense the fracture before it becomes visible, you begin to believe that your job is to fix it. That is where the trap begins. Not in cruelty, not in obvious abuse, in devotion. The savior role is one of the most seductive roles the psyche can offer, because it flatters the part of you that wants to matter. It says, if you can just understand them enough, stay patient enough, love enough, explain enough, endure enough, then the bond will become safe. Then the pain will turn into gratitude. Then the other person will finally see you. But what often happens instead is much more painful. The more you rescue, the less room there is for real intimacy. Because rescue is not the same as relationship. Rescue creates a vertical dynamic. One person is up, one person is down. One person knows, one person is lost. One person carries, one person is carried. And even when it looks noble, even when it sounds compassionate, it can quietly destroy equality between two human beings. You cannot fully meet someone when you are standing over them with your compassion, trying to keep them from sinking, and they cannot fully meet you when they have learned that your presence will absorb the weight they refuse to carry themselves. This is where Carl Jung becomes important, because Jung understood something many people miss. The psyche does not only choose what is healthy, it also chooses what is familiar. A person can feel drawn to being needed because being needed feels safer than being truly seen. If you were the one who had to read the room early in life, if you learned that love meant staying alert, staying useful, staying emotionally available, then the savior role may not have started in romance at all. It may have started much earlier, in childhood, in a family system where peace depended on your sensitivity. In a home where someone's mood could change the atmosphere of the entire day. In an environment where you learned that your calmness, your empathy, your labor, your emotional intelligence were the things that kept connection alive. So now, as an adult, when someone is broken, distant, unavailable, or unstable, your nervous system recognizes the pattern before your mind does. You do not just see their pain, you feel your way into it, and then you begin to confuse immersion with love. This is the deeper wound. Not that you care too much. It is that somewhere along the line, caring became the way you earned your place. That is why the savior role is so hard to see from the inside. It feels moral. It feels generous. It feels like the best part of you. But Jung would have asked a sharper question. What unconscious need is being served by this goodness? That question can sting, because it does not accuse you, it reveals you. Maybe you are not only helping because you are kind. Maybe some part of you is terrified of being irrelevant unless you are needed. Maybe some part of you believes that if you stop rescuing, you will be left. Maybe some part of you has built a persona around being the stable one, the understanding one, the emotionally mature one, the one who never makes things harder. A persona is a mask, but not always a fake one. Often it is a survival identity. It is a face the psyche learns to wear in order to belong. The problem is that the persona, when overused, begins to replace the self. You stop asking what you feel and start asking what is required of you. You stop noticing your own limits and start scanning for other people's distress. You become so skilled at reading everyone else that your own inner life turns into a blank room. And then one day you realize you are exhausted in a way that sleep does not fix. Not physically tired, soul tired. The kind of tired that comes from being emotionally on call for years. The kind of tired that makes you stare at your phone and feel dread before you even open it. The kind of tired that comes from hearing your own voice say, "It's okay, I understand," while something in your body whispers, "I do not know how much longer I can keep doing this." That whisper matters, because the body is often the first place the truth appears. You may notice it as tightness in the chest, a knot in the stomach, a jaw that never fully relaxes, a strange irritation when the same person reaches out with another crisis, another apology, another half-hearted promise. You may notice that the moment they are calm, you feel anxious. The moment they need you, you feel useful. The moment they are distant, you feel compelled to chase clarity. This is how the trap works. It does not just live in the mind. It lives in the body's expectation of purpose. And if you are honest, that expectation can feel almost sacred. Because what is a savior role, really, if not the fantasy that your love can redeem what another person refuses to face? That fantasy is powerful. It can make you endure disrespect while calling it patience. It can make you ignore inconsistency while calling it compassion. It can make you stay in dynamics where you are always translating, always smoothing, always forgiving, always waiting for the moment when your devotion finally becomes visible. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Being indispensable is not the same as being loved. Sometimes it is the opposite. Sometimes a person values your rescue because it relieves them of responsibility. Sometimes they enjoy your warmth because it lets them avoid their own shadow. Sometimes they call you the safe one because you make it possible for them to remain unchanged. And that is where projection begins to do its hidden work. Projection is one of Jung's most revealing ideas because it explains why we fall in love with images before we meet reality. We see a person, but we also see what our unconscious has placed on them. We see not only who they are, but what they represent. The wounded become symbols, the unavailable become mysteries, the fragile become projects, the cold become challenges, the lost become invitations. When you are trapped in the savior role, you may not just be loving the person in front of you. You may be loving the possibility that, through your care, they will become the person your unconscious needs them to be. That is a heavy sentence, but it is a liberating one. Because once you see projection, you can begin to separate the human being from the fantasy. You can ask, who am I actually responding to here? The real person, with their limitations and choices? Or the image my psyche has built around what I hope they could become, if only I were patient enough? This question matters because rescue often begins where reality ends. A person may say they are not ready. They may show you, over and over, that they are not available for the depth you want. They may take, withdraw, return, disappear, apologize, repeat. And still, the savior part of you keeps believing that if you find the right words, the right timing, the right amount of softness, the right amount of forgiveness, everything will finally settle into place. But love cannot be built on your willingness to carry the whole structure alone. And this is where the shadow enters. The shadow is not only the dark side of a person, it is also the disowned truth, the feelings you were not allowed to have, the anger you swallowed, the resentment you polished into grace, the exhaustion you disguised as patience, the part of you that knows this is too much, but has been trained to keep smiling anyway. Many saviors are deeply afraid of their own shadow because the shadow contains a dangerous word: no. No, I cannot keep absorbing this. No, I do not want to be the emotional parent here. No, I do not want to keep proving my love by disappearing into your chaos. No, I do not want to confuse loyalty with self-erasure. When this word begins to rise, guilt often rises with it. That guilt can feel almost holy, as if your boundary is proof that you have become cold, selfish, or unkind. But often, guilt is just the alarm system of an old identity. It sounds the moment you stop performing the role that once kept you safe. If you have spent years being the rescuer, then setting a limit can feel like betrayal. Not because the limit is wrong, but because your old persona has never had to survive without overfunctioning. So the first time you stop answering immediately, you may feel cruel. The first time you do not explain yourself for the 10th time, you may feel guilty. The first time you let someone sit inside the consequences of their own behavior, you may feel a panic that says, if I do not step in, everything will fall apart. But sometimes, what falls apart is the illusion that your love was holding the whole thing together. And that collapse, painful as it is, can be the beginning of individuation. Individuation is one of Jung's most important ideas. It means becoming a whole person, not just a useful one. It means the psyche stops organizing itself around one role and begins to center around the self, the deeper inner wholeness that is not built on approval, rescue, or performance. To move toward individuation, you have to let the savior role lose its throne. That does not mean you become hard. It does not mean you stop caring. It means your care is no longer used against you. You stop making your empathy available to people who only know how to receive it as a substitute for accountability. You stop offering understanding to those who use your understanding to avoid change. You stop treating emotional chaos as a sign of depth. You stop calling your own depletion devotion. There is a particular kind of heartbreak that comes when you finally see this clearly, because you may realize that the relationship was not only painful, it was structured around your willingness to rescue. As long as you were useful, the connection felt alive. As long as you were trying to save, you had a role. And roles can feel like love when you have never been loved without one. That is why many saviors are terrified of stillness. Stillness removes the emergency. And without the emergency, you have to face the raw question. Who am I if I am not fixing someone? That question can feel like a cliff, but on the other side of that cliff is something you have not yet fully met, your own life. Not as a helper in someone else's story, not as the emotional container for another person's unresolved wounds. Not as the one who keeps the peace at the cost of your own inner peace, your life, your breath, your choices, your needs, your boundaries, your grief, your anger, your desire to be met, not merely used. Sometimes the savior role is so deeply woven into a person's identity that they do not even recognize how much they have disappeared from their own days. They know everyone else's schedule, everyone else's triggers, everyone else's pain points, everyone else's emotional weather. But when asked what they want, they pause. Not because they are empty, because they have been elsewhere for so long. This is not a personal failure. It is a psychological adaptation that once made sense. But what once protected you can become the very thing that traps you. And the trap is subtle, because the savior role often brings admiration. People trust you, they lean on you, they tell you things. They may even say you are the only one who truly gets them. That can feel like intimacy. But intimacy is not the same as being indispensable. Intimacy requires reciprocity. It requires two nervous systems meeting, two realities meeting, two people willing to own their own shadows instead of outsourcing them to each other. The savior role avoids that. It creates a pattern where your depth is consumed but not met. Your insight is used but not mirrored. Your patience is taken but not honored. Your love becomes a quiet labor that others come to expect, as if it were part of the atmosphere. And because you are so good at holding, the moment you loosen your grip, everyone notices. Not always with gratitude, sometimes with shock, sometimes with irritation, sometimes with accusation, sometimes with silence. That silence can be especially revealing, because when you stop rescuing, the relationship loses one of its hidden supports. The person who was used to being carried may suddenly feel exposed. The person who depended on your emotional labor may not know how to meet you without it. The person who benefited from your overfunctioning may call your boundary a change in personality. But your boundary is not a personality problem. It is a truth problem. It says the old arrangement was costing too much, and once you begin to see that, the emotional landscape changes. You may still care. You may still feel tenderness. You may still want the best for them. But you no longer confuse their potential with your responsibility. That is a profound shift. Because the savior role thrives on the idea that if you love hard enough, you can redeem the relationship. But redemption is not your job. Your job is to tell the truth. The truth may be that you are tired of carrying emotional weight that was never yours. The truth may be that you have been confusing your anxiety with intuition. The truth may be that your compassion has been stretched into a shape that no longer resembles love. The truth may be that you have been loyal to a wound, and once you see the wound, you can stop romanticizing the pattern. You can notice how often rescue is followed by resentment, how often the more you give, the less seen you feel, how often your kindness becomes a stage for someone else's unresolved dependency, how often you are praised for being so understanding when what you actually needed was to be understood. This is one of the quiet tragedies of the savior role. It can make a person appear generous while slowly starving them of mutuality. That is why many people in this pattern eventually harden, not because they became cruel, because their softness had been overused. There is a point where the psyche says, enough, not as punishment, as protection. And that protection may look like distance. It may look like less explaining. It may look like slower replies. It may look like refusing to rush in when someone is drowning in the same pattern for the 10th time. It may even look like a strange calm that others mistake for coldness. But coldness is not always cruelty. Sometimes it is the nervous system finally stepping back from a role that nearly consumed it. Sometimes it is the moment a person stops being emotionally available to what keeps asking for rescue, but never chooses responsibility. Sometimes it is the first honest boundary after years of being the one who never had one. If this names something you have never been able to say out loud, write a single sentence for yourself in the comments. My kindness no longer requires self-betrayal. That sentence matters because it breaks the spell. It reminds you that kindness without self-abandonment is possible, that compassion does not have to be self-erasure, that love does not have to mean becoming a permanent shelter for someone who refuses to build their own roof. And this is where the deeper transformation begins. Not when you learn how to save better, not when you learn how to say the perfect thing, not when you become more patient with the same pattern. The transformation begins when you ask a different question. Not, how do I rescue this person? But, what part of me believes I need to? That question opens the door to the unconscious. Maybe you learned early that being needed was the safest way to be loved. Maybe you were praised for being mature before you were allowed to be messy. Maybe you became the calm one because nobody else was. Maybe you developed a deep sensitivity to other people's pain because your own pain had no room. Maybe your psyche built a rescuer because it could not afford to feel helpless. If so, then the savior role was not a flaw. It was an adaptation. But adaptation is not destiny. You can outgrow what once saved you. You can honor the part of you that learned to hold everything and still choose not to live there forever. That is what makes this work so difficult and so sacred. You are not just breaking a habit, you are renegotiating your identity. And identity does not surrender without resistance. The old role will try to pull you back with guilt. It will whisper that you are abandoning someone in pain. It will tell you that if you do not step in, you are selfish. It will paint your boundary as emotional abandonment. It will make you fear becoming the bad one. But Jung would remind you that the psyche hates losing its familiar balance, even when that balance is unhealthy. The ego resists change because change threatens the old map. And the old map, however painful, is still a map. So when you begin to leave the savior role, you may feel lost before you feel free. That is normal. There is often a period where you do not yet know how to love without overreaching. You do not yet know how to care without carrying. You do not yet know how to stay open without becoming available to everything. That in-between space can feel empty, but it is actually a clearing. A clearing is where the old structure has fallen and the new one has not yet fully taken shape. Do not rush it. This is the place where the psyche learns a new language, a language of pause, a language of discernment, a language of enough, a language that says, I can care about you without entering your chaos as if it were my assignment. That sentence can feel almost revolutionary to someone who has spent years rescuing, because it restores dignity to both people. You are no longer the emotional firefighter. They are no longer the child you must constantly save. The relationship, if it is to survive at all, must now stand on something more honest than your exhaustion. And if it cannot stand there, then that is information. Painful information, but information. Not every bond is meant to survive the loss of rescue. Some connections only continue while one person is overfunctioning. Once that person steps back, the structure reveals itself. Sometimes, what looked like closeness was actually dependency. Sometimes, what looked like love was a pattern of emotional extraction. Sometimes, what looked like depth was simply repeated crisis. Seeing this clearly is not cynical, it is mature. Maturity is the ability to love without self-abandonment, to help without becoming trapped, to empathize without merging, to stay kind without surrendering your center. And that center is the self, not the role, not the mask, not the rescuer, not the one who always knows what to do. The self, the deeper organizing presence inside you that does not need to prove its worth by carrying everyone else. When you begin to live from there, something quiet but significant changes. You stop volunteering for emotional labor that no one asked you to do. You stop making yourself responsible for outcomes that belong to other people's choices. You stop treating someone else's pain as a command. You stop entering rooms as the solution. You become a person again, not a function, a person. And that can feel both terrifying and peaceful. Terrifying because the old identity was so useful. Peaceful because you are no longer split in half. One part of you trying to love, another part silently drowning. That split is what the savior role creates over time. Outwardly, you look devoted. Inwardly, you may feel resentful, invisible, depleted, and ashamed of feeling that way. But resentment is often a sign that a boundary has been crossed for too long. It is the psyche's way of saying, this is not sustainable. Do not shame the resentment. Listen to it. It may be the first honest voice you have heard in years. And once you hear it, you can begin to make different choices. Smaller choices at first. You do not have to burn your life down. You do not have to become hard overnight. You simply begin to pause before rescuing. You notice the impulse without obeying it immediately. You ask whether the help is wanted, whether the responsibility is yours, whether the cost is too high. You let other people experience the consequences of their own patterns without rushing to anesthetize them. This is not abandonment. This is respect. Respect for their soul's responsibility. Respect for your own limits. Respect for the fact that love cannot mature in a climate of endless rescue. And if you are still afraid that stepping back will make you unlovable, remember this. The people who only know how to receive your rescue were never seeing all of you anyway. They were seeing the role. The role may have kept them comfortable, but comfort is not connection. Real connection begins when the mask falls. Not the mask of the other person only, but your own. The mask that says, I can handle anything. The mask that says, I never need help. The mask that says, I am only safe when I am useful. That mask is heavy. You do not need it to be worthy. You never did. The more you let the savior role dissolve, the more your life can become honest. Not perfect, honest. And honesty has a strange power. It makes room for grief, yes, but also for relief. Relief that you no longer have to be the one holding every collapse together. Relief that you can say no without collapsing into guilt. Relief that love can finally be measured by reciprocity instead of sacrifice. And maybe that is the deepest reframe of all. Love is not proven by how much of yourself you can erase. Love is proven by how fully you can remain yourself while staying open. That is a much harder art, but it is a truer one. So if you have been living inside the savior role, if you have been carrying other people's storms as if they were your calling, if you have mistaken emotional overwork for devotion, let this be the moment you begin to step back from the fire. Not because you stopped caring, because you finally do. You care enough to stop feeding the pattern. You care enough to stop abandoning yourself in the name of love. You care enough to let your boundary become a form of truth. And if the silence that follows feels strange, let it. Silence can be the space where the unconscious finally speaks without interference. It can be the place where you hear how long you have been overextending. It can be the first quiet in which you notice that your own life has been waiting patiently for you to return. You do not need to rescue your way into meaning. You need to come home to it, to the part of you that is no longer available for self-betrayal, to the part of you that can love without losing itself, to the part of you that no longer confuses being needed with being cherished. That is where the trap begins to open. Not when you save harder, when you stop, when you breathe, when you notice the weight, when you put it down, when you let the phone stay silent for a moment without turning that silence into a crisis. When you let the mirror show you not the helper, not the fixer, not the rescuer, but the person who has been there all along. And that person is enough.